my view is that if I've got enough, like red meat, like really good stuff to give to the interviewer, I don't need for them to try and trip me up or catch me out. If I'm giving them great stats, if I'm giving them solutions, if I'm giving them insights, then hopefully they're going, well, this is actually cool, and they'll let me run with that.
You want to look after your people. You want to make sure that the person you're putting in the chair, as it were, has the best tools to deal with what is given to them, and that they will best represent your brand.
If I come away from an interview having firstly, raised the profile of our organisation a little bit, and secondly, helped some people along the way, that to me is the holy grail. I just go, yeah, I nailed that. I'm pleased with that.
Welcome to this latest episode of CommsCast with Jersey Road. My name is Ian Flint. I'm Marketing and Communications Officer at Jersey Road. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about how you, as a charity communicator, can learn to give a great media interview. Now, to help me do this, I've enlisted some help from within Jersey Road. So Esther Jolliffe joins me. Esther, you're Account Director at Jersey Road. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're hoping you're going to have lots of wisdom here from an agency director kind of level in practically giving us some tips. I'm sure you're prepped for that.
Yeah, I'm hoping so too. So we'll see how we go.
We're hoping. We'll see how it goes. And joining Esther and myself is Ian Soars. So Ian, you are CEO of Spurgeons Charity. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having
me. You made it. Congratulations.
Yes. In a cold and a wet.
People will never know the pains and lengths that you've gone to join us this morning. But yeah, safe to say if you live in Eastbourne, it's not ideal getting in at this time, but thank you so much for joining us. So as I've said, we're going to be talking a bit about how to give a great media interview. So Ian, people will be saying, oh, okay, they've got Ian on. Let's see what Ian's got to say. Why have they chosen Ian? Just tell us what your role is with Spurgeons, the life of a CEO, and your experience in media interviews.
So I'm Chief Executive of Spurgeons. Spurgeons are a Christian charity. We deliver family hubs across the UK, but mainly in partnership with local authorities, in prisons and so on, where we care for vulnerable families. And my job in that context is to kind of be a spokesperson, not just to raise the profile, but actually win people to our side in that context. So that's what, hopefully I'm going to impart some of that in what I do when I'm with you and when I'm with other radio broadcasters.
So could you just start, Ian, by summing up for us what does make a great media interview in your experience? What stands out from all the ones that you've done?
So, the first thing, before I go into an interview, I prepare. So I'm prepped, I have key messages. So a great media interview for me is when I've managed to land those messages, whatever they are in that context. But also I think the second thing is, I never just talk about our charity or what we're trying to do. I also try and kind of care for people live on the on air. So, for example, if people are struggling with mental health issues or parenting, because that's what my charity does, I'm trying to land messages for there. So if I come away from an interview having firstly, raised the profile of our organisation a little bit, and secondly, helped some people along the way, that to me is the holy grail. I just go, yeah, I nailed that. I'm pleased with that.
Yeah. And Esther, from your point of view, working with Jersey Road, you're doing a lot of resourcing and training and helping people around media interviews. Just tell people who are listening and watching what you're doing in the agency.
Yeah, I work across a real breadth of our clients, which is wonderful because I get to see so much good work happening. And the reason I do what I do is to share that good work. And one of the great ways that organisations can do that is by through PR. One aspect of PR is giving media interviews. So I do a lot of work where we're kind of building campaigns and picking spokespeople for different media opportunities, and as you say, help on the training side as well. So we have a great training team that actually go into organisations, some just one-off, some who we work with already, and they actually do a whole training day on how to give a good media interview, and I'm hoping I can represent a snippet of that. Ian was actually in one last Thursday, and I didn't realise that. So now I'm hoping I'm going to be as good as the training team.
There's previous here, yeah. We'll see that plays out. And so, Essie, for you, people will be listening to this and they may think, right, I've done loads of media interviews, not as many as Ian, or they might actually think, okay, I'm not really in this space. It makes me a little bit nervous. I'm not sure the value in it for my charity or what we're going through at the moment. Why would you say people generally should push into media interviews? What's in it for the charity and for the communicators?
I think it's a real growing medium. Radio, podcasts. Radio's been there a long, long time, but podcasts, everyone's listening to podcasts now. And I think for a lot of charities, you have the opportunity to reach audiences that might not have heard about you before. And you have, because you're a person going to do the interview, you have that authentic voice to get across actually who we are by being a person. And I think we spoke about it in one of our previous podcasts about how trust in general is declining, especially in this country. And giving a media interview where you come on, you are an authentic, credible representation of your brand, of your charity, of your organisation, just adds to that trust being built up. We have a quote that we use in our media interview training where we say, if somebody wants to interview me, I've always got something to say. And I think that's also really important, how you can, you have an agenda is probably not the right word, but your organisation wants to say something, and that's why you're presenting yourselves to the media, being proactive, because you have something to share. And we work with so many charities that have so much to say, and I just wish there was more confidence in being able to proactively share that message.
Well, I suppose that's the desired result for us having this conversation, is that there will be an increased level of encouragement, confidence. I can do this. We can step out into this space, whether it's Christian media or secular media, whatever it is. I think that's what we're really trying to do today. And Ian, I know from your perspective, you've done many interviews. Do you resonate with what Essie's saying there in terms of the benefits of getting your messages across as Spurgeons, telling your stories in a way that's going to resonate? Have you seen the real upsides to you saying, do you know what, I will go and do this interview, I will put myself out there?
Absolutely. I think there's a number of different benefits. The first one's quite a practical one, but actually, when you're rehearsing for an interview, you begin to get your elevator pitch tight, and actually that forces you to articulate what your charity does. And it sounds a really obvious thing, but a lot of CEOs, if you ask them what their charity does, 10 minutes later they're still monologuing at you. Going, I just want to know what you do. Like, give me. And I think it brings discipline where you're able to communicate confidently about your organisation. But beyond that, most charities, are trying to raise funds either from the public or trust funds, or perhaps you're trying to win contracts from commissioners. And actually, if they've heard of you, that whole threshold of you're not trying to explain who you are and what you do, they've got a grip on that. And then it's just really about how are you going to engage with them to, help them fulfill what they want. So just from that brand perspective, it's not just about, everybody knows your name. It's also about making sure that you've gone kind of a long part of the journey with them, whether that's a public, whether that's someone who could actually give you large sums of money, or even a big contract. And I think that's fundamental. And I also, just to pick up on what Essie just said, I was on training last week because even though I'm on this podcast, I knew that was coming up. You never get complacent. You've got to be good at this and tight. And so, you guys were training me last week in order to be able to do this.
And a lot of what we'll speak about today is how to do the media interview, so get into the nuts and bolts of that. But before we get there, I think it's vital for us to start with how you actually choose the spokesperson to actually represent you in the first place. Because I think, if you get too far ahead of yourself and just say, well, we've only got a comms team of 2, you go and do it, and actually you haven't thought about it, there's no strategy, they may not be the best communicator. I mean, you could have the best story in the world, couldn't you? And actually, if it's not communicated well, it can lose impact. And of course, viewers are going to detect that actually this is someone who maybe isn't passionate about it or hasn't experienced what they're talking about. So Ian, just tell us from Spurgeon's point of view, what's your process? How much importance do you put on finding the right spokesperson for this interview? As the CEO, I'm sure you've got a master plan there.
Yeah, well, I wish. It is fundamental. The difficulty is often when the media interview comes through, or the opportunity comes through, you're not always aware of what's going to be asked of you, And so suddenly one comes through and says, we're really interested in prisons. And the day before it might have been, in our case, Children's Centre, or the day before it might have been mental health. And we haven't got necessarily one person that can cover all these angles. So you're often going, well, actually, who's going to step into the gap? And so when you're making that often quite rapid decision, the things I would say is it's not about rank. If it's about hierarchy, you've kind of already lost, because if it's just about who's got the most senior job, they may not be articulate. They may not be able to deal well under pressure. And, we'd love to think that all media interviews are lovely, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're asking really difficult questions. And so you've got to have someone who won't sweat under that kind of pressure. But most of all, it's someone who's got the heart. And I think that doesn't necessarily come with rank. We got a woman who works for us, Vicky Baird, and she runs one of our prison projects, and we just put her in front of the camera or radio mic as often as we can. She's been on Songs of Praise, actually, if you want to Google that. But, you know, she's got the heart. She knows exactly what she's talking about. She really is technically astute. But also, you can ask her any question and she'll do well under fire, you know. And so those criteria are the things that we would look for.
Yeah, I think people might be a little surprised by that, because I think there's pressure in these interviews. You want them to do well. And I think you can just default to, right, well, you are CEO, you are managing director, you are head of communications. So why would we give it to someone who is, you know, below that role? You think, oh, we need to get someone who's got experience. But I see it's actually more about, as Ian said, the character and who's going to deliver this best, maybe not who's had 20 years of experience in this area.
Yeah, we actually had an event a few months back where Tim Lavelle from Times Radio came to talk to us, and he said exactly that. He said, if you have somebody that's the pinnacle, the essence of the story, but can't communicate or can't hold themselves well, don't put them in front of a mic or a camera. Put somebody who can share their experience on their behalf really well. Choose the person that can speak better. So I think it's exactly that. There are definitely times where a rank or position is necessary, you know, in a time of crisis or something. You do want to have a CEO or the chair of the board or somebody speaking from that perspective because of the serious nature of whatever's going on. So there definitely are times where rank is necessary, but I think you know, Ian's nailed it. It's about who holds the expertise for this particular story, and where are we going to get that passion coming across. Again, going back to what we were saying earlier, it's about that. Who's going to be the authentic representation of the brand in this particular moment, in this particular campaign?
So for you, are there any deal breakers that you would say, okay, someone might be passionate, or they might actually be the best spoken, they've been there on the ground, they've delivered or written this story, but are there any things that you would say people must have this, and if they cannot do X or they cannot do Y, then I'm afraid, you know, they just can't be used? Or do you think it's always a fluid conversation? Because I'm thinking if people just don't like being in front of camera, or people just avoid eye contact, or they just don't quite meet the requirements there, but they're a lovely person and they'd be great on a one-on-one. Would you go that deep with it, or would you not overthink?
I think it's a bit of a both and, because there are some things that we as humans are, you know, fundamentally just do naturally or won't ever be able to do. But there are other things where if you practice, you can get better. And I think if you do have somebody who is owning a really particular part of your organisation, maybe it's something like the prison work or a different element of what you do, and they say it's eye contact, they really struggle with eye contact, but otherwise they can articulate their message really well. That's something you can practice. Yeah. And if, you know, we'll talk about it in a minute, but if you do the practice and you do prepare, I think those opportunities, you know, that person will develop and get better. I think there are some deal breakers, but I think it's, you know, you never want to, a media interview, however friendly, can turn very quickly from an opportunity into something that is not very nice. And, you know, we've all seen them on the news where somebody gets caught out and they just freeze, or they don't have the right thing to say. And you don't, you know, you want to look after your people. You want to make sure that the person you're putting in the chair, as it were, has the best tools to deal with what is given to them, and that they will best represent your brand. And so I do think it's not just another media interview has come in, Julie will do that one again. You have to think about it from the perspective of what's the story, who's the interviewer, where's this going, is it live or pre-recorded? Because that's another thing. You know, you can have people that are great with a live interview, they speak very well off the cuff, but when it's pre-recorded they might babble, and therefore there's a soundbite that gets used, and, you know, that goes elsewhere. But I think every opportunity needs to be thought about who's going to be the spokesperson here.
I'm sure you don't babble, Ian. I'm sure you're straight to the point.
I say that. I feel like I was babbling through the end of that answer. So
it's an art form, not a science, you know. And I think in so when I was prepping for this time, it's quite interesting because I'm actually talking about a subject that everybody can now analyse. Am I doing any good on? Do I answer the question accurately, and am I going to stress under pressure as Ian gets a bit harder on the questions? I think as long as you get your key messages across, as long as you're prepped, as long as you're calm, as long as you're not defensive, actually you'll probably go okay. Most interviewers want a great interview. That doesn't necessarily mean controversy, but it does mean that we have to be wary of our language, in terms of what things are appropriate to say and what not to say, and what we might say at home we probably wouldn't say down a radio mic. And always, we always have the national newspaper question: what if someone is listening? It doesn't matter how friendly your audience is. You might be on Seven Oaks FM, but someone picks it up and it goes national. Do you want that national? Yeah. And so those are the things that we focus on. Trying to keep it upbeat and positive.
Yeah, I think you can get so used to consuming media. I mean, we're now also digitally focused that you can forget. It's very nerve-wracking, I think, and it's hard to prepare yourself. Say you're on a major news outlet, and it could be radio, it could be TV. As you said, once you've said something, it is out there.
It is out there.
And so you've got to be calculated, but you also don't want to be overly scripted. But there is a reality where when you have the lights on you, or you have someone put a microphone under your nose, that all of a sudden you can be a very warm, natural communicator, but you can become a bit tense, can't you? So I don't know how you are, Ian, generally, but do you still get nervous? Do you still have to prepare heavily, or is it something that comes naturally to you?
No, I don't get nervous, if I'm honest, not now, but I do prepare heavily. And so, for every, you guys know, as we work with Jersey Road, we get briefing notes. This is what they like to ask. This is going to be the focus. So I will go away and Google those subjects just to make sure I've got the latest statistics. I will make sure that I've got, in front of me, my pad will be open and I'll have 4 or 5 key points I need to land in that. And in all of that, the other thing is, it's not just about answering the question, getting away with it and thinking, yay, I walked out, but actually also trying to bring hope into that situation. And I think it's the tone of what we're saying is as important as the context of what we're saying. So the content of what we're saying. So, I try to, whenever I'm in a media interview, I'm always trying to think, how do I do this and leave hope rather than despair? So rather than saying, oh, it's a nightmare for families, the children's mental health, it's all a disaster, and what are we going to do? I don't know. Well, if as the expert you don't know, that's, you've just lost your audience right there. But actually having that opportunity to bring hope into that situation is really powerful, I think. So a combination of those things. So, prep, I rehearse, even my kitchen, I'll just walk up and down, I'll rehearse, make sure I get those points landed, make sure I'm data, I've got the latest data, and hopefully, I've got something that's worthwhile for people to hear.
So just going deeper on that, can you just talk to us a bit more about your prep? So are you someone who will word for word maybe write out answers, memorize, go down to bullets? Are you someone who just memorizes naturally? Do you speak off the cuff for quite a bit of your answer? Do you leave room for things to come in? How do you actually go about your creative process? So
never word for word, because the question won't come that way. The question will be changed. Whatever they said they're going to ask you, they're going to ask something different. So
learn fast.
You have to. So hence that's why general principles. And I have the tech list, and I actually literally will go through that. And that's why I rehearse, so that if something comes differently, I can adapt what I've been saying. So I'm not trying to memorize what I'm saying. I'm just trying to make sure I land the key points. But if my view is that if I've got enough like red meat, like really good stuff to give to the interviewer, I don't need for them to try and trip me up or catch me out. If I'm giving them great stats, if I'm giving them solutions, if I'm giving them insights, then hopefully they're going, well, this is actually cool, and they'll let me run with that. And that's like circling back to the beginning of this interview, what makes a good interview? It's those interviews where I've managed to do that, or Vicky's managed to do that. We've managed to get an interviewer that really feels that they've got their money's worth out of it, because that's what they want. They want to engage their listeners. Also, from our perspective, our charity has, but broadly speaking, the listeners got something as well. And if you can hit those notes, then you've got a good media interview. So prep, yeah. practice.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I don't know about you guys, but I find when I have to do any kind of public speaking or memorize something, I'm often an over preparer. So I'll often have lots of notes, but I often find I think it's just a safety blanket, because in reality, I find that I barely look at them.
Yeah.
and you go back saying, why did I, pay myself over, I need to hit these points when actually they brought up something else in me and I just had the words when I needed to, which I understand maybe naturally doesn't come to everyone. But I think it's probably good to be over prepared rather than under, just for every eventuality. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think it's about preparing your key messages in lots of different ways. If you just have one blanket statement that you're repeating over and over and over again, you're just going to look boring, you're going to look inauthentic. I mean, you see it sometimes with MPs. I was watching an interview with Jeremy Paxman a few weeks back, and it was, she obviously had this line that was, the policy has been under consideration for some time. And so he was saying, okay, so when was that? And she just repeated, the policy has been under consideration for some time. And she didn't have any other ways to answer questions around timings, because she'd obviously just had this one key message that she'd prepared. And I think it's really useful for us, and as we talk about these things, Ian was saying about getting that elevator pitch for your charity. Sometimes we don't actually talk about these things enough to understand how to make them into bite-sized segments. So practicing them with friends and family at home, practicing them with your colleagues, practice them in a sort of sorry, I've lost my words. Practicing them in a pretend media interview. Yeah. So you mock have
interview,
a mock interview. Thank you. So you have a few different ways of answering different questions, but your essence is the same messages and stories as well. It's a big part of how you can represent what you're trying to say is through a story, making it real to somebody.
If we full disclosure, if we had Jeremy Paxman coming on to interview, so actually I wouldn't face that interview. There are people who can frame really good, comprehensive, tight, one-line answers, and that's what you face Jeremy Paxman with. You don't extemporize with Jeremy Paxman. You don't tell him a lovely story about you're trying to put the fire out. Yeah. And I think on that, some media interviews obviously are planned. They're coming, but what if in your charity there's a disaster and you're hauled out to account for it? And that's when actually the training and the prep. So for those soft, lovely media interviews, that you've gone through and you've articulated that and you've got your statistics right, 100 times, when it all goes wrong and a microphone's thrust under your face and you're told you have to give an account for what's just happened, that's when you're very grateful that you've prepped, that you know your stuff, that you've perhaps had some training, and that you're not just blurting out the first thing that comes into mind.
Yeah. Have you got any practical do's, don'ts, Essie, for
handling?
From just how to prepare well, kind of adding on what Ian said, but then, when some of those curveballs come in.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about understanding what your risk areas are. So where could the questions come? What is happening in our organisation that could be pulled up on? Another is the wider news agenda. So if there's something that is being spoken about in the news that could have a link into your organisation, building that into your prep. So if you know that story is happening, it's a much wider context, but having understanding of that and building that into your prep is really important. And again, really, really important to choose the right person to put. If you know this big old story is happening in the news and we could come under fire for these different things, is it actually right that this person goes on, or should it be taken up to somebody who maybe has had more training or has had more experience in media interviews, or that position is needed, the seniority? I mean, in terms of handling a question that comes to you in an interview, there are a few techniques. Bridging is one. So giving a short answer and then moving on to what you actually want to say. That actually
you see that a lot as well.
You do. That speaks to a bigger point about what we're trying to do to look after this issue on a wider scale. Bridging over there. Blocking, I mean, no comment. I'm a big fan of The West Wing, and I wish that I could answer a lot of questions like CJ Craig does in the press room, but no comment just isn't really a thing outside of the White House. But being truthful and saying, I'm actually not in a position to answer that question, but what I can tell you is XYZ, or it's not our policy to discuss XYZ. and then moving on to something you can discuss
That's good.
is another way.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So, Ian, tell me, this is what I'm getting in my mind. Nail those key messages. They need to be the central pillar of what you're doing. And everything needs to come back to those key messages, the storytelling. This is what my charity is here to say. Then it sounds like you also need to play percentages slightly. So they may take this question this way. So what if they do? Maybe have a couple of responses based on how they respond to your key messages. And then maybe that curveball question of, okay, if this went wrong, or how is there a way that they could throw me off, and try and almost anticipate what if I get a tricky question? Is that kind of direction you'd be heading in, or would you just say, I'm going to trust my key messages, and if something horrible comes up, I'll get myself out of it?
So when you're speaking, you've got three different purposes to that media interview. The first one is to obviously address whatever key messages you have as a charity. But the second one is that you've got listeners and you need to speak to them. So you have to be, what do they need to hear? And it's not just about what I want to say, but so for example, if I'm doing a piece, there's an article today out about 20-year-olds having more time off with sick than 40-year-olds, mainly due to mental health issues. What would I say about that? Because I know that there's going to be listeners who've got 25-year-old kids who are, really struggling, or maybe even so what would I say? What tools could I give them? So I've got to be mindful of that audience. But the third audience, and the one that's going to trip you up, is the interviewer. Now they want to hear stuff. So it's actually, when you're prepping, say, okay, when I've been called into this, what is it that they want to hear? And so making sure that I hit those notes for them. If you hit their notes, they are far more likely to kind of let you roll rather than try and catch you out. If you're giving anodyne, blunt answers, that don't really speak to what, don't help them get listeners, then they are more likely to come for you. And what is it that your children, your staff actually talk about when, on these particular... Yeah. So yeah, we try and do all of that. So prep, but there's other things. So you've got the three different audiences. I also think it's really important to be mindful of the fact, like in this environment, I'm not alone. I'm actually got you and you. And so I have to listen to what you're saying. What has Esther just said that I need to, I need to make sure I pivot my answer around that. So I'm complimenting Esther, not repeating her. Yeah. What is Liam, where's his direction of travel going on his questions? And so I'm trying to make that, but also quote you back to you and Esther, as I did back to. So what that says is that, I'm not trying to be, a smarty pants. I'm trying to be engaged. I'm trying to be part of the team that's doing this, rather than saying I'm just out for myself. And I think Esther just did something, said it is a really, really powerful point that if you're too defensive, if you block too much, and if you try not to answer, people smell something on that. It's not. So you need to come across as authentic. Yes, you've got to know your stuff, but you're also human. And actually, it's a conversation. Those things, I think, are where you do need to prep, because actually in the actual media interview, there's a tension here. The more prep you do, the better you'll be off when it goes off script. So, for example, when you said you actually write down, actually that makes total sense to me. The chances of you reading that script are negligible, but as you've written it out, it's all gone into your mind, and then you're more equipped to go off. The person who goes into a media interview with only their key messages shows up their guess, I disagree with that, or criticises the government, or criticises the local government, or criticises the local council, or whatever. You're just not going to get anywhere. And you have to be warm and open, because that's who. I mean, you started off this time by saying there's an issue of trust. There is an issue of trust. Big time. And actually, we need to. How do you get trust in someone? Well, it's not if you're monologuing like I am right now. It's not if you're dissing your other guests. It's not if you're being aggressive or critical. That's not how you build trust. You build trust by being open and transparent and best as you can, and actually engaging with the needs of the people that are listening.
You're giving us a masterclass right now, Ian. This is it. We're seeing it in action. Speaking words, and then you are putting it into action on the spot, which is really encouraging. Guys, I just want to finish with some really practical tips. I always like to leave people with, right, let's go and do something about this, rather than just, I'll reflect on what I've heard. So, Esther, you mentioned about the live interview versus pre-recorded. Some people may think, is there a difference? Why should I have a different mentality? But I think of this from an editing point of view, and that actually if I'm doing a pre-recorded, then actually that's going to be edited before it's released. And so what happens if I get my key messages towards the end and something gets cut out, or a quote is taken of me? that doesn't have context and gets put somewhere, whereas a live interview feels a bit more, what I say here is actually being reciprocated straight away. The audience are going to understand me. So what would you say are just some things to think about for people in whether it's pre-recorded, live, things to be aware of, any differences in prep, anything to do differently?
Yeah, I think it's in your key messages, making sure that you can understand where somebody might take a soundbite. So if you write out your key messages, and then how could this be shortened and mean something different? I mean, we all hear it, in the 8:30 headline news. They'll just take a quote from an interview they've played earlier, and it's only like a sentence long, and it gives you the essence of the story that the outlet wants to report, right? It might not have been the essence of what you were trying to say in that moment. So just going over your key messages, working out where they could be, and if they need shortening for a pre-record, shorten them down. Be simple, be confident in them. The other thing you could do is enumerate your points. So the best thing to do in this situation is to have 3 points. So if they're trying to cut it out, the first point is X, the second point is X. They can't really cut that down because you've got first, second, and third. Yeah. That
That's clever.
You're trying to build out a complex message, but make it so somebody can't cut it down, if that makes sense. And live, it's about knowing your stuff. I mean, if you get caught out and somebody asks you see blank faces on the TV all the time. But I would say you also don't need to be afraid of silence. If you've finished your point in a live interview, stop talking. It's the interviewer's job to move the conversation forward, as you've been doing so well today.
Thank you very much.
Although there's not been much silence between me and Ian.
She works with me, but we're all friends.
But it's their job to keep things moving.
Yeah.
So if you've finished what you're saying, don't babble. Stop talking and let them carry the interview where it needs to go.
Have you had experience of this, Ian, with the pre-recorded, the live? What have you generally had to navigate yourself? Have you noticed people soundbiting you or anything like that?
I haven't been soundbited as far as I know. I do think the 1, 2, 3 is very clever. That has gone into the armoury. I have to say, I'm going to totally use
it's
that.
Worth the trip.
That is really good. I think there is a difference in feeling to a live interview, because I don't know why, but you're just so much more conscious that this is irrecoverable. That you can't go back and erase it. So I do think there's a little bit more tension on that, but they also tend to be a lot shorter. So it's a bit of a difference between like a 100-meter sprint and a marathon. So this, sorry for the people listening to this, but this is a bit of a marathon where I'm really conscious of everything I'm saying, and I don't want to come away and think, did I use
Lots
that
of sound bites from here. We've got you. Got you.
But in a live interview, you're more likely to be, you're 2 minutes, maybe 5, but normally 2 minutes. And so it's a lot tighter, and that means a slightly different prep, but also you can be 100% focused, for that time being. And I think that makes it a little bit easier. That's the big difference I've noticed.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. And there's always things to think about that you don't think about when you're not on camera. I mean, for people with long hair, touching your hair is a big thing. I think I've been okay on this interview.
You've not been making a scrunchie, right? Yeah, you've been all right.
But fidgeting, having distractions. I mean, we all remember that interview, don't we, with the little boy and the little girl that came through the door. And I don't think anyone could remember what he was actually talking about, because the whole thing was taken away, dominated by his children.
That's a really good point, actually, because we've talked a lot about the words that you say and your messaging, what comes out of your mouth, but also your body language and how you are is actually what you do with your body and your hands and your mouth and your eyes is actually equally as important. So I'm thinking in terms of some tips for body language. I mean, you've got the obvious posture and eye contact, but Ian, what would you say? Because it's hard to be conscious sometimes of how am I coming across at the moment. I'm just thinking, get these key messages out, and then you look it back and you're like, oh, I'm as stiff as a board in that interview. How can we be self-aware of what we're doing with our bodies?
I'm going to try and make this pithy, but So we have a lot of therapists that work with children, and when you talk to a therapist about trauma, what they'll say is that the body holds trauma, and you can tell often because people's shoulders are hunched over and they're almost crouched in. Even if they're stood up, they're almost crouched into themselves. And what a therapist will do with someone who's gone through trauma is get them to change their posture, open up their shoulders. And actually, the idea is that the trauma begins to, it's not diminishing trauma, but you begin to manage and assess that trauma in a lot more realistic space. But never more so than when you're live, in an interview. If you're in a defensive posture, you will be defensive. And as you roll your shoulders back and as you engage more in eye contact, you will be a lot more positive. And people, they can't quite put their finger on it, but they can see it. So yes, I think posture is really, really key. I wave my hands a lot, which drives people mad because I'm distracting. I can't stop it. I'm just, it's me. So if I have a flaw, there it is. You can look for it on this. But also, sometimes you're not in control of that. So I've got an interview coming up where I'm having my hair cut by an ex-prisoner who we've been working with, and he's out, and we've supported him in that, and he's setting up a barbershop. So I won't be in control of my posture, and I won't be in control. And this guy is not going to ask me nice questions. I don't know what I'm going to get. And I think these moments, though, are informed by the more sanitized, controlled environment like this one I'm in. I'm confident to go and sit in his chair on camera, although it's obviously recorded. But the reason I'm confident to do that is I've had these moments because last Thursday I was in a training session with Jersey Road, and it actually was a huge coincidence. The dates were just weird. I turned up to this thing, are you actually? Yeah, that's me, But I feel it's important that I'm there, and also that I don't ask any of my staff to do what I'm not prepared to do, whether that's go on training or put myself in front of a microphone. So in terms of posture, you've got to be confident. You've got to be full of hope. You've got to leave that message. You've got to land it well. It's not all about. Most people in my world, we are, whatever charity they're in, they're always trying to fix a problem, and we can become so obsessed by the problem, and that dominates our tone, that dominates our language, that dominates our outlook. And actually, that's not what people need to hear. What they need to hear is there a solution to that? And so all of that does require some positive body language, tone of voice, that there's hope, it's going to be okay. I remember once I actually said that in an interview. It's really difficult. It's World Mental Health Day or something for kids, and there was some really distressing questions going on about some really complex mental health issues that children face. And I remember using the language, it's going to be okay. It's going to be, I was like speaking directly to the parents, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, just trying to imbue confidence in what I'm saying. So that all of that language and that body posture and that tone, coming together to hopefully leave a good impression.
That's what we want. That's the end result at the end of the day that we're all looking for. Essie, just closing words to you. Leave us with a takeaway, something practical that you're thinking. Listen to me on this as the final words. No pressure.
That's quite a lot of pressure.
Ian can back you up if you don't.
I would say two things. One, try and be clear, consistent and compelling in your interviews. And two, when you're preparing, prepare 3 key messages in a story. You don't want, you guys spoke about having like loads of things written out, and that's a really good way to practice. But if at the end of your interview, which 3 things are the ones you want to get in there, really focus in on those. And like we said, think about how you can share them in different ways. And one of those is a story. How has what your organisation does really change the life of somebody? And that will bring that hope to people. Oh, there's somebody else like me that's struggling with this, and this is what has helped them. Maybe I could try that.
You agree, Ian, I think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, it can be fun. Don't go in there dreading. It can actually be enjoyable. Yeah. And everybody wants you to succeed. I mean, obviously you want you to succeed, but actually, the audience wants you to succeed. The interviewer wants you to succeed. I mean, they're not trying to catch you out just for laughs, but most of the guys behind you, your team, who need the morale raised all the time, they want you to succeed. And actually, there's something really powerful, I think, about senior staff or CEOs or directors or anyone just going on to go out there and bat for their charity publicly. It's a real morale booster. So it can be fun and it can be really good for the team. And I think it's worth it. It's worth it. Give it a go.
Good. Positive end. Ian, thank you so much for all your insight and advice. Modelled so well. So thank you very much for your time and for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Essie, thank you very much.
You're so welcome. This has been fun.
So we hope you've enjoyed either watching or listening this episode. And if you'd like to find out more about who we are at Jersey Road, you can head over to our website at jerseyroadpr.com or check us out across social media.